Get underway. Thank you.
I still see Murray Campbell doing a lip sync to that song.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to start out with a prayer from the Reverend Canon John from Chapel of the Cross Church.
Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. We brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Into thy hands, O merciful Savior, we commend the soul of thy servant Bud, now departed from the body. Acknowledge, we beseech thee, a sheep of thine own fold, a lamb of thine own flock, a sinner of thine own redeeming. Receive him into the arms of thy mercy, into the blessed rest of everlasting peace, and into the glorious company of the saints in light. We give thanks for his life, for his ministry, for his love, for his friendship, for his accomplishments, which he offered unto thee. Receive these thanksgivings, we ask of thee. And now would you join us and pray the prayer our Lord taught us, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. We give thanks for all lives well lived. Enjoy.
We already had a technical difficulty. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Grenada Theater. All right. For this wonderful celebration of life. For those of you who don't know, my name is Chuck Rhodes. We're joined together today by the spirit of one man. He was born as B.E. Bowling Eldridge Buschardt, probably only known by that to the government and his mom and daddy. But to all of us, he was just Bud. In the 45 years we knew each other, he was a teacher, an advisor, a confidant, a textbook of musical knowledge, an entertainer, but most of all, Bud Buschardt was my dear, precious friend. I stumbled into his television directing class in Class 101 classroom in 1976 in the RTF department at North Texas State University in Denton. Yes, I still call it that, graduates. Sorry. I was enamored, intrigued, and terrified of that old gray switcher that had been donated to North Texas from Channel 8. But Bud made it all come to life soon we were doing commercials, creating television as we knew it. Again, as many of you in this room know, I learned a wealth of information from Bud, as many as you have too, radio, television, music, movies, and as we grew older, found myself a lifelong friend. Together we celebrated milestones in my life, 30th birthday party in Bud's spacious backyard, my wedding rehearsal dinner at Bud Aunt Mary Eleanor's house, and then there was that crazy bachelor party at Bud's house, my bachelor party, and the bowling machine incident a lot of you in this room shared with me. By the way, George, I'll beat anyone's offer on that bowling machine when you guys get around to it. So, in the early 90s, I returned to KVIL for a brief stint as program director, and Bud was doing his oldies show on Sunday night. He always used to brag and tell people I was his boss, but I guarantee you the teacher was still training up the student. As the years rolled by, and my wife Catherine and I and our girls made our home in Nashville, Tennessee, I found on occasion to come back to Dallas for shows and special occasions in my music travels. And during those times, I would always accept Bud's offer to utilize the Buschardt Hotel on Azalea when I could visit. During 2020, I did not visit Dallas due to the pandemic, but Bud and I spoke on the phone every couple of months. I find it particularly a God thing occurring from the last conversation we had 4 days before his passing. He actually called me to tell me about our mutual dear friend and Three Amigos dinner date companion, Rob Ray, who had been admitted to the hospital with a not-so-good diagnosis. But thanks to lots of prayers, a lot of you guys in this room, Rob is here with us today to celebrate Bud's life and is doing much, much better. Bud and I talked that Thursday night, and he told me he had tripped and fallen on Wednesday during a walk around the neighborhood, and again later that night. But he said his dear friend Doug had gotten him checked out and his next door neighbor and was doing okay. I caught him up on the goings-on in Music City and with Catherine and our family, and we were done with the conversation. Not knowing it was the last time I would ever speak to my friend, I thank God every day that he gave me the opportunity to tell Bud I loved him and that he did me. It will be a phone call I will cherish the rest of my days. And now let's move on with the program, ladies and gentlemen. If you would allow me to, the first person up to share some memories and thoughts is Bud's nephew. Would you please welcome to the stage Matt Buschardt.
Hello all. Thank you all for coming to celebrate the life of Bud Buschardt. My name is Matt Buschardt, and Bud was my uncle. He was my Uncle Bud. Going to Bud's as a kid was always a special treat. He had a pinball machine, a jukebox, and a bowling machine all in one room. That was cool and all, but I loved the next room in his house the best. His beloved record collection. So many great memories in that room. It was so awesome to ask to hear any song you wanted to hear. And within 30 seconds or so, that song was spinning on vinyl. One day, Mabel Buschardt, Bud's mother, and my grandmother were stuck in Bud's house and decided to count all the dials and knobs and buttons on Bud's soundboard. There were 200 dials and knobs on that piece of equipment that we knew nothing about. The volume was the only one we were allowed to touch. The other 199, I had no idea what they did, but I guarantee you Bud knew what each and every one of them did. Fast forward to the 80s and early 90s, Bud's music collection expanded to include compact discs. I loved being able to pick out 10 or 12 songs from different CDs, and Bud would put them all on one personalized CD for me. My daughter was 4 the first time she got to visit Uncle Bud, and just like always, Bud rolled out the red carpet for her. He would set up his microphone and record her singing a variety of different tunes and make her very own personal CDs as well. We always had such a blast with Bud. You might think Bud's passion was his music, but I think Bud loved teaching his craft the best. I can't think of a Christmas or Thanksgiving when Bud didn't bring up one of his students or ex-students that was doing this or doing that here or there. He would have a glow about him as he spoke about their accomplishments. I think teaching his students brought him the most joy. It helped keep him young and up to date with the times. After his passing, I was so very touched to see so many of his past students saying many nice things about him. It speaks volume as to what an all-around great person he was. I've never been one to talk on the phone for long periods of time, more of a, hey, how's it going, hi, bye kind of guy. We didn't speak as often as I wish we would have, but when COVID hit and I knew Bud was quarantining and staying home a lot, I made it a point to call him a little more often. Next thing I knew, 30 or 45 minutes had flown by, and he was always so easy to talk to. I will miss our talks. I'd like to think that Bud's life here on earth was his A side, and now he has flipped the album over and moved to the B side. If his B side is half as good as his A side, he's doing just fine. Bud was definitely one of a kind, and he will be missed. If there were more Buds in this world, it would definitely be a better place. I love you and will miss you, Uncle Bud.
Next to the mic is the man that's really been responsible in coming in and putting all this together and kind of running the show along with his sister Sue, Bud's sister Sue. Would you please welcome George Buschardt, that's Bud's brother, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. I do want to tell you there's going to be a test at the end of this, but Bud wanted me to tell you the answer is going to be C, so don't worry about the test. Bud managed to accomplish many things in his life. He was just an amazing man. The amazing part was I didn't know half of it because Bud was not the type of person to brag or boast or let you know what he had done. You had to find out on your own what was going on. He'd always tell you about this or that, but he never bragged. Bud was born September 19th, 1941. And in Bud fashion, I found the medical bill from the hospital for $103. That was 10 days in the nursery for Bud, plus the delivery room, but it was the best money my mother and daddy could have spent. Bud passed away on March the 15th of this year. Mom started his DJ career as the fact that he had asthma and she did not want him to go outside and play and get hot. So she had a little record collection of some Glenn Miller music and stuff that played back in the 40s. So she would ask Bud, she'd teach him to look at the record label and tell one record from the other, and they'd love to test him and say, okay, bud, play Bing Crosby's song, and he would go get it. Mom said he was right most of the time. So I guess he didn't get paid for his first DJ job. When we were young, we got an allowance. And once we would get the allowance, the first place Bud wanted to go was to the record store. So we'd head to the record store and he'd buy his records. And I wanted to go to the fun shop and get some toys and some stuff. And then I want to stop at the candy store. And that's how I got this figure. My sister got her allowance, and I believe Sue still has hers. I don't think she ever spent it. One smart one out of three. For our education, Bud went to Montrose Elementary School. Then he went to Lanier Junior High School, then Lamar, and then he went to University of Houston, where he graduated in spite of me, and he got a radio and television degree. When I say he graduated in spite of me, I used to like to go to the fun store. And back in those days, they had what they called a car bomb, and it wasn't like the car bombs today. You'd put one wire on the spark plug and ground the other wire, and when the person would start the car, it'd boom. Well, Bud had a fraternity party, and I thought, well, it's going to be pretty fun if I put a car bomb in everybody's car. So I did. Well, unbeknown to me, Dr. Batten, the head of the radio and television department at the University of Houston, was at the party to speak. And he was the first one to leave. And my buddy and I were standing across the street to watch the action, and we looked at each other and thought, that guy's way too old to be one of the frat boys. And sure enough, Dr. Batten got in the car, and that car bomb worked perfect. Boom! Well, like I said, he had a sense of humor, and Bud graduated anyway. So in spite of me, he got to graduate University of Houston. I found out after he died that all 4 years while he was at University of Houston, he got Outstanding Radio and Television Student of the Year, which of course shouldn't surprise me, but again, he had never mentioned this, so there was no way to know it. The job market in 1963 in Houston was very sparse, and he couldn't find a job there. My aunt and uncle in Dallas, Bob and Mary O'Connor, invited him to come live with them and look for a job. As it turned out, this was 1963, and WFAA said, well, John F. Kennedy's coming to town, so we might use you part-time. We'll just try you out. Well, of course, after Kennedy's assassination, they saw what all Bud was capable of doing, and Bud became a full-time employee. At his tenure at WFAA, he served as a cameraman, a producer, a director, a writer, an audio specialist, and he was very proud that he produced the first concept music video produced and aired in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. It was called All You Need Is Love, and it was done in 1967. He loved doing the Ron Chapman Something Else show because he got to be with the young people, and he loved, I think he stayed young because he surrounded himself with so many young people. Bud continued to collect records all these years, and he really loved the music business. He wanted to do something on the radio, and he had talked to the people at WFAA, and they had put him aside time after time. Well, when Bobby Darin passed away, Bud went to him and said, how about I put some Bobby Darin records together and we do a salute to Bobby Darin? He said whoever he was talking to at the time disappeared. And Bud stood there and waited and waited. He thought, well, I guess they don't want me. And the gentleman came back out, and Bud said, well, what about it? And he said, well, you better go home and get your records. We're advertising right now that we're going to do the special. So Bud was a stickler, as you all know, for following the rules. I used to be up visiting him, and I'd say, hey, we're driving back to Houston, and we're going to be listening to your show. Why don't you say something about your cool brother? And he said, "Oh, you cannot do personal messages on the air." So imagine my surprise when we're driving back and Bud comes on the air and says, "In case any of you all are driving back on the highway, please drive carefully and watch out for yourself. And here's Dino to tell you where you might be going." And he played Deane Martin going back to Houston, Houston, Houston. So he followed the rules, but at the same time, he managed to break them to talk to people that he wanted to let know that he loved them and cared about them. Now he's in television, radio, and he decided he'd start doing some private parties to make a little extra money. So he's out there spinning records at weddings, birthday parties, graduation parties, whatever it took. He'd load the van full of his equipment and his records, and he'd go spend the money. Now, he was asked to do the research on the Buddy Holly story for the big screen. That meant he had to check the music that was playing to make sure it fit the proper time. For instance, if Buddy Holly turned the radio on in 1954, Bud found them playing a record that didn't come out till 1957. So Bud would correct that, and he used a lot of his own music to make sure everything was correct. Now, once Mother found out that Bud's name was on the big screen, guess who had to take her to see the movie? Not once, not twice, but 3 or 4 times. And of course, like a theater here, once the movie is over, everybody gets up to leave. Well, not Mother and me. We had to sit till all the credits went by. And about the 3rd or 4th time I'm sitting there and they have the lights halfway up, I realize that everybody's looking at this young man with this older woman and wondering, what are they doing still sitting here? So I think he got even with me for the car bomb right then and there. Now, he wasn't satisfied just doing the parties, radio, and television. He started teaching in 1972 at North Texas State, where he stayed until 2018. That's 46 years of teaching. Again, surrounding himself with the young people to stay young. I think he also did 1 year from 80 to 81 at SMU, but his love was North Texas State, and he really enjoyed the students. He would come to Houston, and it was not unusual for him to be able to name every student in the class. He could tell you which one was doing good and which one was having a hard time. He told me one time there was one student who had only made 2 classes, and it was almost time for the final. And now this student came forward and said, "Oh, professor, what can I do to pass? I've got to pass your course." And I think almost all professors would have said, "I'm sorry, it's too late." But Bud worked with them and figured out a way to make it work. By now, he also had a Power Clock Music Publishing Company and GPC record label. The Smell of Incense was by Southwest FOB, and it became the #2 song on KVIL radio. I think Doc Wilbright and Ovid Stevens are here. You all here? Yeah. All right, thank you all for making that record and helping Bud Company do so good. He was also called upon one time on the Monday Night Football when Dandy Don Meredith was there. The show found out that Dandy Don had made a record when he was quarterbacking for the Cowboys. However, nobody could find the record, and they wanted to surprise Dandy Don and play it on the air. And somehow someone had the name of Bud Buschardt. They called Bud. Bud said, "If I have it, it's in my trash closet." And for those of you all know Bud, he had a closet for the songs that might not make it. And he went and looked through there and found Dandy Don's record, Traveling Man. So on Monday Night Football, they played the song Traveling Man. It turned out, for Dandy Don's sake, that they re-released the record, and I think it became almost a hit, as much as it could be. But again, Bud got credit for finding the record on national TV. He wrote for the Buddy magazine, which was a Texas music magazine. He also wrote articles for National Record Collectors magazine, Discoveries, and Gold Mine. In 1977 and 78, the Elvis Presley estate and the RCA Victor Record Company hired him to testify in court as to a fake Elvis record that was being sold, and of course, with Bud's testimony, helped them win the case. You know how we have Siri and Alexa today, and you can say, who sang the song, whatever, and Siri will tell you. Well, we had Bud Buschardt when I was growing up, and if you were somewhere and made somebody a bet, all you had to do was call Bud, and he'd had the answer for you. Normally, he didn't have to look anything up. He knew it all from memory. And we even called him one time because when the Big Bopper, Buddy Holly and Richie Valens died in the plane crash, everybody knew those three stars. And I was talking to a gentleman at a bar one night, and I said, I bet my brother knows who the pilot was. So call Bud at 1:30 in the morning. Hey, Bud, who was the pilot in the plane crash? And I believe he said Phil Peterson. I wouldn't swear to it. But anyway, he rattled off. And of course, my friend had to check it later and found out he was right. He was inducted into the Texas Radio Hall of Fame in 2010. And I cannot think of a person more deserving than Bud. You know, now he's been TV, radio, professor, student. He does it all. And he and Sam decided to write a book, The Something Else Story, Something Else Show. And of course, they've written the book, and he was successful in that too. So when I say that he was an amazing man, there's not much that he didn't know and didn't do. He was a musicologist to the extent that better than anybody else. And I'm sure he's back to spinning records for nothing up there in heaven with Mother and not getting paid again. Thank everybody for coming. On behalf of the family, we appreciate you all so much. Thank you.
All right, great stories, great memories. Next, coming up to the stage is a gentleman who I met many years ago, but never really got to visit a lot when I was with Bud, but he was always in Bud's backyard, and that was because he was his next door neighbor. Would you please welcome, for over 45 years, he lived next to Bud, and he and his wife was really looked out for him and took care of him. Doug Shackelford, please.
Hello, everybody. Thank everybody for coming to celebrate Bud's life. He was just one of those type of persons that I've never heard anybody could say anything bad about Bud Buschardt, unlike some of us, we don't fall into that fraternity. But Bud was our neighbor, our friend, but most importantly, he was a member of our family. When our son Miles, on his first birthday in 1981, Bud left a present by the front door, didn't just ring the doorbell, no thanks were wanted or needed, he just wanted us to know that he was thinking of us. And that's Bud. Many years ago, we started a tradition of going to dinner with Diane, my wife, Bud, Mary Eleanor, and Bud, and we would go either to Mexican food and margaritas, or we'd go to that little hangout Bud liked to go to, Dunston's Steakhouse on Lover's Lane. We followed Bud's career through the years, and I remember I had an automotive shop, and I would take his car in to work on it, and this is in the early 80s, and he would have a cassette tape, and his radio, and it'd be him practicing his cues, his ins and outs, and timing. And you go, hey, this is Bud Buschardt bringing you the. So, and after Bud and we had a couple of parties in our backyard, he kind of got me into doing a little part-time DJing myself. And one time he told me, he said, after a couple of songs, you need to play something slower. You're going to kill these people out there. You can only play Shout Part 2 for 30 minutes. So, and then, but we just had a great rapport. But Bud never ran out of time for his students. Sometimes we'd see the same cars over there for 2 or 3 days on a weekend. And it'd be Bud and his students holed up working on some project, and it would be like a 24-hour-a-day marathon until they got through. I think Joe was in on a couple of those. But he never ran out of time for his students, and that was his way of spending his time off, was being and doing for his students. Did anyone ever feel like Bud was ready for you to leave? Time was your time. He never felt like, hey, it's time for you to go. And it was about 15 years ago, we had a tragedy in our lives, and we had to be gone a lot during the day, and we were worried about our dogs being inside for too long. So Bud said, bring them over to the backyard, and I'll watch them play and take care of them and give them snacks. And that's kind of how we really became more intimate with him than we had in the first years we were together. That's when Diane started going over there once or twice with the dogs, and she'd sit and talk to Bud about anything and everything, from families, friends, jobs, music, even some of the parties Miles had in our backyard that we hadn't known about. So Bud started coming to all of our family get-togethers, birthdays and holidays when he didn't go to Houston. And sometimes we just have people over for a gathering of some sort, and after a while I look up and I go, where'd everybody go? And Bud would take all the new people over to his house, and he'd be over there showing them music, playing music, and telling them this, be on the, but he totally enjoyed that. He could not express how kind he was to people. I had a friend that I play golf with, and he's my age, and Bud DJ'd his 10-year high school reunion. And when he found out Bud lived next door to me, he said, I sure would like to meet Bud. So I called Bud, and Bud said, sure, bring him over Tuesday at 2 o'clock. And so I brought Ted over there, and he spent 2 hours with a man he never knew, but he remembered the party, the high school he went to. He remembered the high school reunion. He remembered where it was. It was uncanny, his memory. And so we through the years, we came to know and love George and Sharon and Sue and the rest of some of the other family. But I got to admit, would any of y'all, anybody here, guess that George and Bud were brothers? But most importantly to me was how much Diane and my wife and Bud grew to love each other. Diane would get fed up with me and say, I'm taking the dogs and going to Bud's. And because Diane runs at about 78 RPM and Bud was 33 1/3, so he was a calming force for Diane. So it helped our marriage tremendously, believe me. But we were so blessed to have Bud in our life, like everyone here has. It was just one of a kind man, just a gentle spirit. And Diane was always fixing something. Whenever she'd cook, there was ours, Bud's, and then our son Miles's family. Just always something for him. And so she took something over to him on that Saturday. And that evening I went over and watched a little TV with him. There was Daryl Hall has a show, Daryl's House or something, and Smokey Robinson was on, and I was talking to Bud, and we were watching it. And even then, Bud had been feeling better for the last couple of days. He was getting better and stronger, but he still was having trouble with his balance. But even during this, he was going, I'm working on this recording, and I got this song I got this song I like, but the one in the middle, I'm just not feeling it, where it goes from here to there. But anyway, he was still working. But now Bud, we all know he's in the Texas Radio Hall of Fame, And we know God has set up a studio for Bud to run exactly like he wants. So till we meet again, we love you, Bud.
Thank you, Doug. Next is a gentleman who worked with Bud at KVIL and ABC Radio. He and I have had the pleasure of working together for as long as that time in radio at KVIL. And would you please welcome to hear some stories and memories, Steve Eberhart. And I will say, while Steve's coming to the stage, I will say just Doug triggered my memory of another Bud memory. And I know several people in this room have experienced that. If you did go to dinner with Bud, how many went to Preston Rural Shopping Center and went to Buck's? I mean, it was just the greatest Chinese food. Buck was such a personable, wonderful man. And you could tell when Bud Buschardt was in the house, the first word out of Buck's mouth would be, "Professor!" So he loved Bud, and Bud loved the entire KO family. So Steve Eberhart, here he is.
You know, I was thinking just the other day about Bud a lot, and just the simplest thought came to my mind, and that is, isn't his name the perfect name for Bud? Because he is a Bud. He's a buddy. He's a friend. He has the perfect name. We all remember Bud so well. I also thought, just while sitting a moment ago, about something everybody's been talking about, his love of the music and the background and the oldies and things like that. And it reminded me of something Ron Chapman said to me one time, said, you know, Bud found 1957 and never left, right? And Ron was right about that. I spoke to Ron last week, and he's doing well, for those that are wondering. Like many of us here, I too am deeply saddened by the unexpected death of our friend Bud. His reach was wide, his legacy will last forever, and not only his family, close personal friends, but the hundreds, perhaps thousands of students that he taught, mentored, and guided. Clearly, he was a loved man. What more could one ask? I got to know Bud in the early 1980s while at KVIL Radio here in Dallas. I was aware of his previous work at WFAA Radio on his 57 Nostalgia Place show that ran on Sunday nights. I listened to it occasionally, and I was kind of a fan of oldies songs and music back then, kind of still am. And so I enjoyed listening to it. So I knew who he was, but I had never met Bud. Back in the 80s, many of you that are from this area will clearly remember, KVIL Radio back then was the radio station everybody in the industry wanted to work at. And it was my dream the first day I ever turned on a microphone. And I was so lucky to actually get to work there for almost 10 years. At the time, it was the most imitated radio station in the industry. Enormously high-rated, successful, dominant #1 for decades. Our boss at the time, of course, was Ron Chapman. And we had a meeting one day, and Ron announced that Bud Buschardt would be joining KVIL. And I smiled, thinking, wow, that's great. I'll finally get to meet Bud Buschardt. Then he said Bud would be joining us to do a weekend oldies show on Sunday nights. Everybody in the room was like, oh, wow. And I was kind of smiling, and then I went, wait a minute. I do Sunday nights. So I was thinking, you know, as we all paranoid radio people do, think, oh man, I'm getting blown out or something. What's going on here? So Ron quickly explained that I would be co-hosting the show with Bud. Well, I had never co-hosted a show with anybody, but I liked the idea, and it seemed pretty cool. I liked oldies, and although I didn't know Bud, I knew of him. We met that day and formed a friendship that lasted almost to the day 40 years. On March 22nd, 1981, and the only reason I know this date is because Tom Goodell told me, and he knows every date, also right at 40 years ago, We did our first show on KVIL on a Sunday evening. Ron had prepped us on the do's and don'ts, and we went on the air that Sunday night and did the show. And we thought we were cooking. We thought we were doing a great job. Felt very positive. Bud was extremely prepared, as he always was, almost scripted word for word. I did all the KVIL stuff, and he would do all the oldie stuff. So we go through the whole show, and we're thinking we're doing great, and at midnight, in walks Ron Chapman. Now, he's got to be on the air at 5:30 the next morning, but this shows his dedication to duty. He apparently was in his office the entire evening on a Sunday night listening and had the yellow pad, right? And unbeknownst to us, he had been watching and monitoring. He handed us both 2 envelopes, said, don't open them till you get home. Turn around and left. So we go out of the studio. Chris Burton comes in and takes over, and we're looking at each other, and I said, you want to go get something to eat? He says, yeah. So we went up to JoJo's. Remember the old JoJo's up on Central Expressway, where we would go a lot of times and eat late at night after the show. Well, we're sitting there, and I think we ordered, and curiosity got the best of us, and I said, we need to read these things. So we opened them up and read them. Both notes were identical. The notes were a little difficult to read. We thought we had done a really good job. The notes were scathing. And that's an ultimate understatement. We were both just stunned at the methodology in which we were critiqued. I imagine that there was no way we were doing this show again. There was no way, with as much negativity as that note expressed. Now, I didn't necessarily disagree with anything that was said, don't get me wrong, but it was 4 pages long. I felt bad for Bud because I understood Ron's attention to detail, having had worked there for several years already, but I was worried that it might scare Bud off. Well, it didn't, because Bud wanted to work at KVIL so bad. Having worked with Ron before at Channel 8 on the Something Else show, it was also his dream to work at KVIL. Ron called us a few days later and said, get back there and do it right, or words to that effect. The next Sunday, we did the show again, being careful to follow all the directives we were given. We got a hotline call. Everybody that ever worked there knows what that's like. Big red light right above you, like one of these, but it's red. And when it goes off, the whole room lights up red. Not joking. And there's no mistake who's going to be on that line. So that'll get your attention. So he called us late in the show and said, sounds great, love it, keep on, rock it. Hangs up, just like Ron. So we felt a little better about things and felt like we might have yet another show to do. We kept going and things got better. Ron began to love the show, approved of everything we were doing. There were no more criticisms. And Ron appreciated what we were doing, so we were feeling a lot better about it as well. We did the show together for several months, and I never really realized that I was going to do this. I kind of was under the impression that this was just going to be short term, and then we would just let Bud do the whole show. Well, after about 3 months, then Ron said, I think he's got it. So we transitioned for a couple of weeks with me being on the side and Bud running the console and getting all that down. And then Bud took the show over by himself, and he continued doing the show for years. Now, I left KVIL after several years, went over to K-Love, the oldie station, which still is here. I wanted to get them to hire Bud because I thought, you know, he was on KVIL, we were the oldie station at K-Love. I thought, Bud would sound so much better over here, and he'd be such a great asset. I was never able to convince him of it, but I still thought it would be a good idea. Now, I'll tell you a secret. When I was at K-Love, of course, Bud's still over at KVIL doing his weekend oldie show. He would occasionally call me and say, you know, you guys aren't playing the right version of that. And so I would stop by his house on the way home, and he'd have a reel-to-reel or something of the correct version. And so I would take it in the next day, cart it up, and we'd have the right version of, you know, whatever record it was. Sometimes he'd call and say, hey, they just released a new stereo version. I noticed y'all are still playing the mono version. Now again, he doesn't even work there, but he's concerned about the quality because that's just his passion, right? That was Bud. So nobody at KVIL ever knew he was furnishing good stereo copies to Kayla, but sorry, it did happen. After a few years at K-Love, I returned to KVIL, and one time, and I'm really not 100% on the date, but it was after 1989, because I think that's when I went back over to KVIL. Bud lost his voice, and many of you probably remember that time. It was a Sunday, and he had been having some problems, and I remember I was on the air before him. He was following me, and he just had a really difficult time speaking to me. And I remember thinking, gosh, how's he going to do a show? And he did go on the air, and I had to come back in and say, Bud, you know, I love you, but you know, your voice is just not there. Let me just do the show today. I've got your script and everything. You can stay here and tell me to do whatever you want, but you know, it's just not gonna work today. And so he agreed finally, and so I did the show for him. Well, he had some sort of severe vocal cord damage. Others would know this better than I, which resulted in several months, am I right, that he could not speak. Literally, could not speak. So Ron said, look, you're the only guy that knows oldies other than Bud. So I went in and did the Bud Buschardt Oldie Show for several months during that summer, as I recall. Finally, he was better and came back and took over. He did the show until 1991 when KVIL started doing the Cowboys, and so he was replaced by the Cowboys. And I guess if you're going to be replaced, you know, that's not a bad way to go. When I left KVIL, I went over to what was then the Satellite Music Network, later part of the ABC radio network, broadcasting to hundreds and thousands of radio stations all across America and beyond. My first week there was a Saturday afternoon show, and I did my show, and who follows me for his Saturday night oldie show? Bud Buschardt. So we're back together again working at ABC, spent many years doing that. Over the years, I've visited Bud's home many, many times, and as others know, those that have been there, and some of which have been spoken about earlier, his home was like a museum of music. It was amazing. I remember telling my son about it when he was a teenager, and I said, look, you just got to go over there and see it. I took my son Johnny over there, and he was just like amazed by all these different things. And of course, Bud was just so gracious with him, showing him all of the different things. And that was Bud. He was always so gracious. And I would always enjoy the tales of various rare copies, whether it be, you know, one of 3 of Buddy Holly's acetate of one of the early songs, or whatever other thing he had. I could stand there and literally pull any 45 or whatever out of the shelf and say, Bud, tell me about this record. I might get 5 minutes, I might get a half hour. And that was very normal. In the last 20 years, I've lived 5 minutes from Bud, just up the street, which was really nice because I could visit Bud more often, and did. Occasionally, I'd see him at the grocery store or at one of the restaurants nearby or local businesses. Often, we'd grab lunch. And as somebody earlier maybe mentioned, lunch with Bud was never a quick bite and run. It just never was. If you were in a hurry, that's not the guy to go have lunch with. And the two of us would sit and talk about nothing in general, everything in retrospect. It might be on music, it might be on radio, it might not be about any of that stuff, but we would talk sometimes literally for hours. If I ever had an oldies question, I could always call Bud. Bud, did the Cascades ever do a stereo version of Rhythm of the Rain? The answer is no, by the way. He would know that though, instantly. When the tornado hit Dallas a year and a half ago, I knew the tornado was a mile south of my home, up by Preston Forest, and fortunately we were unaffected. But I heard the tornado and I was outside making sure everything was okay. I immediately thought of Bud because I knew if it was down there, that's where Bud was. And he was the only person I knew that lived that close in that direction. I got on the phone and tried to call him, but the cell towers were already down, power was out, and his landline was down too. I went and got into the car and drove to his house because I was just really seriously worried about him. But I was so pleased to see him standing in the yard picking up branches in front of his house when I drove up. The tornado struck a block south of his home with incredible devastation, but he was so lucky and I was so pleased that he was unaffected. When we would talk, he loved my little radio station up in Gainesville. He would ride up with me sometimes to just see real, local, small-town radio being done the way it used to be. And he was thrilled to see that somebody was still doing that in this age of automated radio. And I actually wanted him to do an oldie show on my station. And we had had serious talks about it in the not-too-distant past. But he was just too busy with other projects, and then his health just prevented it. We had visited 2 weeks before he passed away. We were talking about CD releases of these new records that are now in stereo, being reproduced through some new technology from the old previous mono records. And we would always talk about, I can't believe they didn't record these in stereo back in the day. And now they've got this technology that somehow makes them sound like they are. He was real excited about it, so he was sharing those with me. He was always making copies of stuff that he had found. He would find something, he would call me, Steve, I've got a new radio edit version of such and such that I haven't been able to find before. I've got a new stereo version of this that's never been out before. He also loved my Just for Fun online streaming radio station, oldiesradio.us. He was my P1, if there is such a thing. He would email again and say, you're playing the wrong version of this song. Or he'd say, hey, I've got a stereo version of that. Do you want it? Of course I wanted it. The email would come minutes later. He was a very good broadcaster, but perhaps a better listener. He gave you the attention you needed at just the right time you needed it. He shared his knowledge, and he did it often, whether it was music, oldies, radio, television, whatever. Never with an attitude. Always just with the intent of being helpful. I'm not surprised that many of his students over the years admired him so much because he was a giver, not a taker. He saw the potential in people and helped craft them. That's a special trait that all great teachers possess, and certainly he did. One thing I remember most about Bud was that he was incredibly prepared for whatever he did, whether it be on the radio, working in television, being a teacher, anything. He was prepared. He believed in systems, formatics, and purposeful intent. He didn't have to do any research because he was the encyclopedia of the music research. People came to him, as did I, to research an artist or song. If he didn't know or couldn't find it, it probably didn't exist. He was one of the rare individuals you meet in life who have a lasting effect, even if you don't see them every day, month, or even years. He was also one of the rare individuals who was multi-talented. Broadcaster, teacher, programmer, musicologist. Succeeding in any one of those careers would be impressive. Being as diverse as he was across so many platforms made him amazing, and he was. I'm not the first to say that Bud was one of the nicest guys I've known. Zero ego, 100% friend. As we were concluding our last visit just weeks ago, I noticed that he seemed a bit more frail than the last time I'd seen him. I told him, Bud, I'm 5 minutes away. If you need me anytime, day or night, call me. I'll be here. And I would have been there for him because I know if the circumstances were opposite, he would have been there for me. I was thinking the other day about Bud and what ultimately he was like. As simple a statement that it is, the ultimate truth is, he was a good man. No, he was a great man. Thank you.
And Eberhart, remember, this is the NFL. So, speaking of that, I'm going to ask Sam Sauls to come up, and while you come up, Sam, for our next speaker, I'm going to just give you a little caveat of something that happened today. I did get a call after Steve spoke of him from Ron Chapman. I spoke with him last week. He just wished everybody well and wished he could be here today, but was just not feeling up to it. But he did tell me to say, and I would never not do what he told me, that he remember and think and wants you to remember Bud as a gentle man and a gentleman. And that was his biggest asset. That was his biggest light that shone in people's eyes. And Ron said that's how he remembers him. And he just said his best to everyone today to let them know that he's still with us. He's still rocking on. and he wished he could be here. And speaking of Ron Chapman, he'll tell the next chapter of that book. Sam Sauls is also an old University of North Texas alumni. We were all together 40 years ago. And he is the co-author of the book. He and Bud wrote Something Else about Ron Chapman in the Something Else years. Please welcome Mr. Sam Sauls.
First of all, I want to say on March 14th, my wife and I were driving back from Florida up to our home in Pennsylvania, and Steve Eberhart messaged me about Bud's situation. And Steve, I just want to say thank you so much for doing that for me. Thank you, Chuck. Like many of us here, Rob and Russ, and then George Gamark and Emcee, I met Bud in the mid-1970s when I was a student at then North Texas State University. I would later have the honor of being a faculty member with Bud at now UNT, where I taught for 29 years. Bud and I spent about 9 years working on the book, The Something Else Show, which was published in 2014, and I want to thank Victoria, who's here, for publishing the book for us at Digital Media. In the book, as you might imagine Bud would do, he tried to note everyone who worked on the show and provide as much detail about the production. That's probably why it took us about 9 years to write the book. It was a great time for Bud as he went through such detail and remembered the days that he thoroughly enjoyed working on the Something Else Show. As Chuck just mentioned, in particular, I know Bud would want to thank Ron Chapman for providing the extensive notes of his career that we then were able to detail in the Something Else show book. My wife Dawn and I have had the opportunity to become great friends with Bud over the years, and we were able to visit with him quite often as we would journey back to Texas from Pennsylvania. We will miss him greatly, that is for sure. And I'm going to be extremely brief and just say thank you, Bud, for letting me be a part of your life, and it really was something else. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam. Next is a young man compared to me. I could still call him a young man. He was a student of Bud's from UNT that went on to excel as a film editor, screenwriter in Los Angeles, and now he's in Atlanta doing film editing work on a lot of the movies that you guys used to see in the theater a year ago and now on Netflix. Would you please welcome Joe Binford Jr.?
Thank you, Chuck. I just want to say, by the way, that story about when Bud lost his voice, Chuck came in and did at least one or two. You were on air for a second. I remember, because we were waiting for Steve. So, hi, my name is Joe Binford Jr., and Bud Buschardt was my best friend. And like many of you here today, we all remember how we first met Bud. And a lot of these stories have been told, but I did meet Bud Buschardt at the University of North Texas at the time, and I took his TV directing class. And while my diploma in film says University of North Texas on it, I actually graduated from the school of Bud Buschardt. You see, Bud's class was highly sought after, and back in the day, registration for film and TV was you had to actually show up in person. So a given Monday, everybody would line up starting at 8 o'clock, and they'd fill out this form, and you'd get in line, and there'd be a line all the way out into the, basically all the way to the general academic building for Bud's class. So I thought, I've got a better idea. I know that there's a cleaning service on Sunday nights. True story. And I went to Kendall Hall where I was living, and borrowed a cot from down in the basement, I think, and grabbed a pillow, and I walked across the university and waited for somebody to come out, and I snuck in the door, and I camped outside the front door of university, and then North Texas State University's, I think her name was Kathy. I can't remember the sweet redheaded office manager. Anyway, she shows up about 7:45, and there I am asleep, and that's how I got the class. Now, Bud was pretty impressed by that, and I told him how much I loved music, and he saw how much I was just a nerd. I mean, I'm still a nerd, I gotta admit it. And anyway, so moving on with this story, and little did I know, because Bud loved that story so much, that he ended up kind of giving me the opportunity of a lifetime. He said to me one day after class, after several months, and we worked together and did projects, he said, "Joe, I am looking for an intern this summer. I need somebody to re-alphabetize and organize my entire record library. Would you be interested?" So I had actually been to his house, and he had a function there and invited the students, and we ate outside, and we got to see his record collection, and I took the job. I went for it. And, you know, everybody's talked about the brilliance of this man. He was so organized. You've seen pictures in the videos, and I'm just going to tell you a little bit of the nerdy kind of nuts and bolts about what Bud did since as a kid, George, like you were talking about. But Bud decided that he would put all the the country and western in green sleeves, the oldies in brown manila, rock and roll, hard rock, punch in it, white sleeve, and then R&B, soul music in yellow sleeves. And Bud said, it's pretty simple, and you walk into his house, and in this floor-to-ceiling record collection, every letter had a tab sticking out of it. And, you know, the letter A, and we'll have to think of a performer with the last name A, but anyway, I would grab all the A's and put them on the ground, as many as I could fit, about 2 or 3 feet wide, and I'd pull them out, and he said, let me give you an example. Rolling Stones stays in R. Bob Seger goes in the S's. So invariably, somebody would be at his house, and they'd try to put something back, and all of a sudden, I'd found a record out of place. So I would re-sleeve everything, and over that summer, which I believe was, you know, 80, whatever, we formed this kinship. And Bud turned to me at one point, and he said, hey, listen, I'm doing these things called remotes. I need a sidekick. Rob Ray was unavailable, or McKee, or Chuck did it at some point. He said, would you join me? Would you like to do this? I said, hell yeah. And so we packed up this van full of giant Serwin Vegas and a couple of Techniques and boxes of 45s and some records, and we would go do, and we were killing it. I'm telling you folks, in the 80s, it was hot to do high school reunions and corporate events. We made a killing, but sometimes on a Saturday, I can remember one Saturday, we actually had 3 gigs on the same day, and I was the little baby-faced kid picking up all the equipment, and my job was to set it up and let Bud be the personality, and I would keep all the drunks away from the table when they would come up and ask him stories. Anyway, so I just want to say that he also basically instilled what it was like to be a businessman, working for yourself. And any student and any person that ever met Bud, this common theme tonight, would know how much he loved people. And if anybody embodied music and emotion all the time, that man was just loved people. And he was an agent too. You'd walk in and he'd say, oh, hey, listen, Joe, I think McKee saw so-and-so and Eberhart, and I was talking to Jim Rowley and, you know, Cardi the other day, and blah, 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 blah. And all of a sudden he would put together these combinations for work in the future. And so he was always thinking about helping others and very selfless. And anyway, just to go on and on, he did quite a bit in the 80s, and I just kind of got tagged along. And I've seen a lot of KVIL people. I looked like I was 12 years old when I was 19 or 20, and I couldn't ever get a drink even at 21. But we, why am I telling you that? Because I didn't think I was going to get a job at KVIL, but I kind of shadowed Bud. We'd do the gigs during the weekend, and Bud would let me stay in the guest room. And sure enough, I kept seeing, Chuck on Sundays, and Scott McDonald was running, the audio room. And before long, Scott was going to do something else on another shift, and I had been watching how they recorded music. And Bud's show, after you, Mr. Eberhart, ran for 8 hours every Sunday. You see, he was live from 10 till 2, but somebody had to record 4 hours of music and play it back at night. And that person, for a couple of years, several years probably, was me. And Bud would send the audio feed back to this room, and we had this thing at the end of every hour, because he always, like you said, meticulously planned every moment. At the end of every hour, we would play an instrumental, and that was enough time for the nighttime guy with Paul. Do you remember? Anyway, on Sundays when the show was played back, it would give enough time for the next reel to be played on, or if there'd been some news thing, you could shore it up so everything kept in time. But the reason we recorded it and I had to edit it is that there were always Sunday commercials that were only, Haverty's on Sundays, and Sunday night it would sound stupid to say today only. So I got to cut out 2 minutes pieces all the time, and so I learned that Hound Dog and Don't Be Cruel were always 2 minutes and 2 seconds, so I could always cut those in. But here's the thing, I'm this young kid, and I am an idiot trying to just kind of like, I'm so interested in having squirrel moments, and all of a sudden I would hear an instrumental song. It's the end of the hour, and what it meant was the two recorders, one of the recorders didn't have any tape on it, and that was my responsibility. So I had to run. Every time I heard an instrumental, sometimes at the end of the hour, I was running through the radio station, and Bud would yell out, "Real change!" And I'd be running across, and I'd get over there, and I'd put this, 10-inch thing and get it all queued up and start recording it at 7.5 inches per second, and somehow it all worked. Bud Buschardt was like a father, without a doubt. He never, ever jumped off the call. He would call me and say, "Hey man, when's the next time you're coming in from LA? Or when are you gonna be here next? I've got this class." And he would go on and on and on and on about this project that somebody had done. He was so proud. And I got lucky enough to go visit a couple of times and act crazy with the kids. And they just, everybody loves Bud. And he never stopped with any projects. I think I had so much to say, and I just kept writing and writing, and I thought, well, I don't want this to be a 30-minute program about Joe Binford's impression of Bud Buschardt. So there are 2 songs that I couldn't get a date to save my life when I was a kid, and much less in college or afterwards. But when I'm listening to all this music and we're spinning records, the romance of what Bud would show in a love ballad he taught me about true love ways. He taught me about color my world. And so, just why you and I will by and by know true love ways. Sometimes we'll sigh, sometimes we'll cry, and we'll know why just you and I know true love ways. Throughout the days, our true love ways will bring us joys to share with those who really care. Sometimes we'll sigh, sometimes we'll cry, and we'll know why just you and I know true love ways. I love you, Bud Buschardt. This event is amazing. And you're still here, brother. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. Remember the Ford Econoline van. We used to load that sucker up to go on the road. All right, coming up next is a gentleman who worked with Bud at ABC, was instrumental, let me tell you guys, in helping George and the Buschardt family put this celebration of life together for all of you to enjoy today. Our deepest appreciation goes out to Aaron and for your selfless efforts. We love you. Aaron Kannowski, please.
Now I feel really honored because George has given me a standing O. Thank you, George. I actually wanted to give just a couple thank yous as well to some people behind the scenes that really helped out too. Jill here at the Grenada Theater was so helpful just to kind of help with whatever we needed to get details done here. Emcee Smith is doing some recording and filming, so we have a document of everything. Martin Zaranko is doing the live stream. I believe he's up in the back. Thank you, Martin. Really appreciate all your efforts. And John Sparks, he did just a fantastic job putting together all the slideshow pictures and the video that you saw when you first came in. So please, round of applause to those people. While Bud's voice has been heard by millions, did you know that the sound of Bud's garage door opening and closing has also been heard by millions? When I moved here in 2003 for a job with ABC Radio, Bud was one of the first people I met. We bonded instantly. Not only did we both collect records and CDs, but we both had a weird obsession with having the right version of a song. Anyhow, while Bud was in one studio at ABC playing adult standards on Stardust, I was down the hall on Radio Disney, pretending to broadcast from my garage. At least once every show for Theater of the Mind, I'd play the sound effect of the garage door opening and closing, which of course was Bud's garage. That was the start of a friendship that has been one of my most cherished. To describe the impact Bud had on my life would be impossible to do in only a few minutes. The best I can sum it up is that he is like family to me and my wife, Kelly. In fact, he visited us at the hospital on the day my first son, Matthew, was born. He knew my parents, he knew her parents, he knew our siblings and their families. One of the things that amazed me about Bud was not just how many people he knew, but how many people he knew really well. From coworkers to music collectors to his students at UNT, when he got to know you, he made you feel like family. I believe God led me to Dallas for many reasons, but if I had to pick the two most important reasons, number one was to meet Kelly, and the other was to meet Bud. Over the years, Bud and I spent countless hours playing records in his massive music library, and we would often go to dinner at one of our favorite restaurants, like Cantina Laredo, where I would order what Bud jokingly referred to as a glass margarita. You see, on one of our first visits there, I ordered a frozen margarita, and after a few sips, I found a small shard of glass in my mouth. So it became Bud's running joke, "Hey Aaron, you want to go get a glass margarita?" From that point on, I switched to only drinking margaritas on the rocks. So today, I raised my margarita to Bud, one of the best men I've ever known. God bless.
Thank you, Aaron. That's great. Next, coming up, if you'll put your eyes on the screens up here, we should be having a tribute video, about a 6-minute tribute video coming up, which please, eyes on the sky.
My parents named me after my dad, who was named after his uncle, who was named after my great-grandfather. So unfortunately with me, since I did not have any children, this name does not exist anymore. My name, Bowling Eldridge Buschardt Jr. Yes.
1, 2, 3 o'clock. kid between 3 and 5 years old, somewhere around there. I had asthma. And they found that the reason to keep me quiet was to give me a stack of records and let me play records all afternoon. This is the most valuable record in my collection, or one of the most valuable, from a Buddy Holly recording session.
The first rock and roll record I remember hearing as a kid was Chuck Berry's Maybelline in about 1955.
Maybelline, why can't you be true? Have you heard the news? Bud is a-rockin' tonight.
8008 Elam Road, if you'd like to come in and say hello. Hi, Steve Goddard, how are you?
Just getting ready to rock and roll. I got a whole lot of love.
Here's a group that used to play right at this very roller rink. 5 Americans, January 1966, and I see lights from 57 Nostalgia Place, WFAA, live from Twilight Skating Palace, 8008 Elam Road. Come see us.
KBIL.
My first professional job was in television. It was a part-time job at WFAA TV. I really lucked into that. All of a sudden one day I was in there and I was walking out the door. He said, I don't have anything right now. As I was getting to my car, he yelled, hey Bud, come here. Would you consider working part-time? And I said, when do I start? The Something Else Show was on the air from 1965 to 1968.
Back in the 60s, though, teenagers hoping for instant fame danced on the Something Else Show. Bud Buschardt was the unit manager who ran the studio back then. He joins us right now. Welcome, Bud. This is so cool.
Yeah, we had a group called the Little Group. They were the 4 main dancers on the show.
Yeah.
Del Fatigue, Colleen Anderegg, Joni Prather, and let's see, who did I leave out? Kathy Forney.
Look at that, the coat.
Yes, I can't get into this anymore. There was a dress code for the show. The girls had to wear school dresses, the guys had to wear coat and ties. So there we are. So we decided as crew members, if the guys had to dress up, we were going to dress up too.
At the University of North Texas, I met Sam Sauls. In fact, I knew Sam Sauls when he was a student at the University of North Texas. And he said, tell me something about something else. What made it so successful? And so I'd tell him a little story one day, and then maybe a week or two later, I'd tell me something else about something else. Tell me something about it. Finally, he said, start writing those stories down. We need to do something with some of these stories of how this television show worked and why it was so successful. And so one night I decided, I took a legal pad to my bedside, started writing notes. I took them to him and I said, Sam, is this what you want? And he said, you know what? We might have the making for a book here.
He is also an adjunct professor and lecturer at the University of North Texas.
I was one of Bud Buschardt's students about 10 years ago. Bud was an awesome professor, an awesome friend and teacher. Bud volunteered his time separate than his teaching requirements, and he spent dozens, if not hundreds of hours with me in the studio, and that was outside of class. Thank you for pouring into my life, and you'll always be remembered.
That's great. Wonderful. And aren't we all glad Bud grew into those ears? After 79 years. God bless him. All right, moving on. I know this has been a little extensive time, but let's take some time to pay tribute to a great man. Would you please welcome another gentleman who worked with Bud at ABC, Brian Huen, please.
Well, hello. Thank you very much for all coming. My name is Brian Huen, and I'm a radio announcer and a producer at Westwood One Radio Networks. And I was also working at Radio Disney with Aaron. That's where Aaron and I met, and also where I met Bud at the ABC Radio Network side, the American Broadcasting Company. So I want to thank the family. Thank you very much for asking me to be a part of this. And again, as Aaron pointed out, thank you to the tech crew. And the reason why I want to mention you guys is because, as you guys all know, Bud was also a behind-the-scenes producer and taught all the tech crew. So once again, let's give a big round of applause to everybody behind the scenes here. We're going to have an open mic portion a little bit later. And for all of you air personalities, please keep your breaks on Bud about 20 seconds long. Remember to hit the post, please. So that's a little radio humor for all of you. Thank you for the laugh. So the thing about Bud is that when I moved from San Francisco originally to here to Dallas, Bud, as you all know, he just took an interest in you. And when he was speaking to you, you just felt like that you were like the most important person in the room. And that was just a gift that he gave to each and every one of us here. And as you guys all heard, Bud's first job was working at WFAA here in Channel 8. And when Bud and I just kind of first starting to meet, I heard about this story, and this story just always just kind of like stuck with me because, as he said, he got his job working one November fateful day right before JFK got assassinated. And the story that always stuck with me is that Bud was the cameraman holding the shot when JFK's death certificate was being broadcasted. And as Bud would quickly point out, not here in Dallas, but all throughout America on the ABC television news network. And Bud got very, very nervous when he realized that, and he just wanted to make sure that he did not drop the camera. And while you guys all know, and you saw in the video and the photos about Bud's record collection, for those of you who are watching on stream who have never been to Bud's house, I mean, it was like literally, as pointed out, a museum. Every room, with the exception of the bathroom, had wall-to-wall records, tapes, and CDs. And so while you guys were all record collectors with Bud, I was an air check, an audio radio collector. And so Bud and I would bond over that as well. And, you know, the other thing, too, that I found out about Bud is that his memory, his encyclopedic memory, as you guys all mentioned, my recollection is that Bud would tell you that Fun, Fun, Fun by the Beach Boys peaked at number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100. Did not need the Joel Whitburn book to recall that. And he would also tell you what the B-side was, which is Why Do Fools Fall in Love? And, as I pointed out, and that George also mentioned, that he could tell you the color of the record label, which was just fascinating stuff as a young broadcaster like myself. And the other thing, too, is that Bud and I would get together. So while you guys, our restaurant was the String Bean, because Bud just loved his chicken and dumplings. And I love chicken and dumplings, too. And so when Bud found that out, he would tell me about the String Bean, and we would eat there frequently. So that was like our little place. And when Bud and I would get together, I would always make him tell me a radio wartime story. And as you guys all know, he just had endless amounts of stories to share. And yet, in addition to talking music and radio, we would always just talk about life. My family, I would hear stories about you, all of his friends outside of radio and music and media, and it was just great. And the other thing, too, that I would always love about Bud is that as mild-mannered as he was, he also had a very slight, irreverent sense of humor, which was easily foreshadowed here in the photos as we all walked in, because there's a great photo of Bud and his entire students giving us the finger. So that was also a side of Bud that we all just thoroughly enjoyed. And I just had lunch over here, just down the street here with Jim Green. Jim Green was my producer and Aaron's producer at Radio Disney. And Jim really wanted to be here, but he's working down the street at the American Airlines Center. And another person who wanted to be here but can't because he's in Los Angeles, he's also a former Radio Disney Air personality, and his name is Kyle Eberhart. And Kyle's also a high prolific voiceover artist. And Jim and Kyle both summed it up with Bud, is that Bud was just very selfless. I mean, he just gave and gave and gave of himself to others. Here's the thing. We have some very, very high-profile people in this room right now. And Bud didn't care what your status was. What he cared about was who you were. And he treated everybody the same. And as Jim Green said, and Doug, Bud's neighbor, echoed, his time was always your time. Think about that. Bud's time was always your time. And not very many people in this world have that gift to make you feel that way. I mean, you know, the other thing that I pointed out is that if you could not get time with Bud, it's because he was spending his time with someone else. And Bud did not want credit, right? He was all about your success. It didn't matter if it was in media. It could have been another form of your professional life that we probably never even heard about. But the fact is that, again, Bud was about your success. And, you know, he was a very dear friend, as we all know, to each and every one of us in this room. This man right here was a very good friend to each and every one of us, and he impacted our lives. I mean, really, look around this room, okay? People on the live stream, recording, all of you former students of his. All of our lives have been transformed by your brother, your uncle, our friend and our mentor. He invested in each and every one of us. Again, to you on the live stream, he invested in you. He made us better broadcasters. He made us better people. And, you know, I know Bud would say this, that as any good producer of us, find at least one person and invest your life into theirs. And that's how the dividends of Bud's life will continue to multiply in each and every one of us. I thank you.
Thank you, Brian. That's great, man. Thank you so much. All right, we're sliding in a quick addition to the program. Jack Shell, would you please come down? He begged me to speak. Oh, Lord, here we go. We're coming up to the news at 6, Jack, so please, we've got to move this through. So, ladies and gentlemen, my friend for at least 30 years, my cohort, KVIL's midday guy forever and everything else that he's ever done. Would you please welcome the fabulous, the wonderful Jack Shell.
I have been to so many, like you, have been places where people came up on a stage and spoke, and so often they really didn't know quite how they were doing it. They had the microphone over here. But today, wow, everybody up here, especially the young man just moments ago, he really knew how to work a microphone. How many times have I been to a gathering like this where the speaker wasn't suitable to my ears, and I would yell, "Eat the microphone." And guess what? They knew what I meant. Look, I can't add a whole lot. I just got to tell you, look, I've known Bud. By the way, how many years have you known him? 45. I made a note of that. But, Cardi, are you here? No, Cardi didn't make it? Okay. Well, Cardi could back me up on this. I met Bud Buschardt in 1964. When I joined WFAA Radio, he was running a camera. 1964, he was at WFAA. You know what that means? 57 years. I just want you to know that. Stop. But there are some really swell people here this evening, this afternoon. I know I'm going to make it real quick. I've already knocked off about 9 of the things I was going to say. But Billy Bob, I'm glad you could make it too, and Jody Deane and Craig Slayton and many of the other people. Becky, all of you. There's one thing about wearing these damn masks. There's more like the what do you call it? The thing where you, the secret prisoner thing, whatever it is, whether you're not supposed to recognize anybody. I know there are some great people in the room, like he said, but with those masks on, I'm not really sure who it is until you say something, and that works really good. So I just want to say hello. I'm Jack Shell, and I have a couple of things to tell you. First of all, let me tell you, I've heard so many great things about Bud, so many good things about that boy, and I always, well, look, in an hour and 37 minutes, I have learned more about Bud Buschardt than I learned knowing him for 57 years. Oh. I'd like to see him again and say, Bud, I just found out I needed to give you a lot more respect. I'd dial him up and go, hey, Bud, how you doing? What's up? Okay, yeah. Hey, listen, let me ask you something real quick. What year did Sonny and Cher marry? And what was the name of the church they were married in? Thank you. Hang up on it. You know what I mean? I love the guy. There's no question about it. Like Chuck said, we spoke to him the week before he had that fall, and just where in the hell did that come from? He shouldn't have happened. Okay. Tiny little picture of Bud. He rented a house just west of the railroad track, Highland Park. It's just outside of Highland Park. Now, I don't know if you remember that. But anyway, it was a house. Bordeaux. Good. Thank you. Okay. I went over to see him one day, and he said he was going to be moving, and I said, this place has got so much going for it. What's the problem? He said, well, the people who own the house have told me that the floor is beginning to sag a little bit, and they're concerned that it might be affecting the foundation, so I need to go find a house with a better foundation, which he did, of course, over on Azalea. But I thought that was very funny, and it's a true story. Now, whether that really what happened or not, I don't know, but I'll never forget it. And also that he invited me to speak to his class at North Texas years and years ago, and I said, Bud, what am I supposed to go through? You know, he said, we'll have some questions, and that'll get it. I'll introduce you. And he said, why don't you start off with telling them how to be successful in radio? Okay. Number one, have a good boss. Anyway, think it over. So I show up at the class. There's a class full of people in North Texas. I graduated from North Texas too, by the way. He said, so Jack's going to tell us about how to be successful in radio. Jack, go right ahead. I said, I'm going to be able to tell you. You may have some questions about this, but I know how to succeed in radio. I've already found out because I'm an experienced professional. Here it comes. You ready? Make notes. Write this down. Show up. Number 2, show up. Number 3, you know what that is. Show up. And you'll all know in your heart of hearts that I'm absolutely right. And eat the microphone. I love Bud. I'm knocking a bunch of stuff off here. Did anybody notice that when Joe earlier on spoke, said that the bill for Bud's birth, now listen to me, the bill was $103. Did you make note of that? Did you notice that? 103, hello? And maybe they could throw in 70 cents, you know, to make it 103.7, whatever. Well, I'm telling you, that's good karma. Okay. Well, I tore that one up and threw it away. Who cares? No one cares. All right, no one cares. I've learned so much about Bud. Thank you all who've spoken. And I'm only asked him if I could come up and say just a couple of words to say, one, I really enjoyed knowing this man. I wish he was still here. Let's assume that if we do it well enough, that Bud will hear us applaud. Come on, Bud.
Yes.
Love you, Bud. Thank you. Yeah, God bless him. That's exactly how I feel. And I'm going to get off the stage now, but before I do, I got to tell you, a pal of mine, who was also a good boss, pretty much, came down from Nashville, Tennessee, to put this all together, the speaking part. Please give a good hand to my good friend. It's, what is it? Chuck Rhodes, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Chuck. Good job.
Hit the jingle, Jack, please. One quick thing I'll add about the gentleman you just heard up here, just to put in perspective what you just heard. This young man used to work at a real radio station in Texas years ago, AM radio station. I believe it was out in the middle of nowhere. He would sign the radio station off at 6 p.m. in the evening when the sun went down for AM. Then the station would be off. Then he would continue to stay there and broadcast to himself for the next 6 hours. So just understand that's what you're dealing with right there with Jack Shell. Thank you so much, Jack. All right, moving on very quickly. 10 minutes to 6. I got a show here tonight, so we got to get the hell out of here in a minute. Another dear friend of Bud's who has a special announcement today from UNT, but also has celebrated a storied career in radio and television. Would you please welcome Phyllis Slocum?
Hi, everyone. What a terrific event. We've been hearing absolutely fantastic stories about Bud's life. I'm here to share something about Bud's future. I'm a lecturer at Media Arts. I'm the station manager at NTTV, North Texas Television, and I'm very proud to say I'm Bud Buschardt's friend. Bud's impact on the people he cherished most in the department, the students, is hard to describe. It's all-encompassing, from classroom work to lunches in the TV station lobby, sharing his Dr. Pepper, I might add, or coming in on his own time to mentor dozens of students, probably hundreds of students, really, in dozens of television shows, all on his own time. His commitment to education and the students never wavered. And now, thanks to a most generous gift from Bud's family, it will continue. Bud's family has established an amazing gift, an endowed scholarship for the students in the Department of Media Arts. Let me read you the legacy statement for the Bud Buschardt Endowment Scholarship. Bud Buschardt served as an adjunct professor in the Media Arts Department at the University of North Texas for 46 years. He enthusiastically shared his wealth of knowledge and experience with his students by creating teaching opportunities based on his career in television and radio. He began working in the Dallas-Fort Worth market in 1963, where he produced and hosted shows on WFAA and KVIL. An avid lover of music from an early age, he earned the title musicologist. In 2010, he was inducted into the Texas Radio Hall of Fame. Bud's innate kindness established him as a supportive mentor who was always available for guidance and an encouraging word, even years after his students left the classroom. Teaching was his passion, and he delighted in his students' success. This scholarship is intended to honor Bud by providing an opportunity for students to pursue their passions and to create their own successful paths to the future. Your generosity in this endowment means that beginning next year, we will be giving out the very first Bud Buschardt Endowment Scholarship. Thank you so much in advance for the students who will benefit in years to come. And finally, one other quick note. Your action has also sparked another one. A second scholarship is being established, the NTTV Bud Buschardt Scholarship, which will grow over the years. We called Bud the godfather of NTTV. Now, not only will his spirit live on in the legacy of the station and this wonderful endowment, but so will his voice. Students who never met Bud know him well. His voice is the one that tells us every night, broadcasting live from the University of North Texas, this is NTTV Nightly News. Thank you.
Thank you, Phyllis. What a pleasure to hear from you on that. Just fantastic. And we know that Bud loved University of North Texas and his time there. And we just appreciate that so much. I gotta fix my 57 Nostalgia Place t-shirt. One more second, because people who see that, well, maybe that's not gonna work. I think the tape's finally given out. Okay. I'm gonna put that right there. We love you, Bud. I'm gonna put that right there. All right. Next. To wrap up our speakers, at this point, we would like to bring two gentlemen who were very instrumental in Bud's, instrumental being the key word in Bud's life. Doc Woolbright and Ovid Stevens. Ovid's a world-renowned musician that came together with Bud in the 60s, originally from a group formed called These Few that morphed into what we now know as the Southwest FOB in 1968. As Bud would say, on the hip label, and the color of the label was orange. Of course, Bud knew that off the top of his head. I had to Google it. But would you please welcome Ovid Stevens and Doc Woolbright.
Hello. We're just a little bit part of the Southwest FOB, and I got very lucky and blessed and I moved to Los Angeles. Well, I don't know if that's lucky or blessed or not, but
that's true.
Yeah. But Doc and I met Bud through it was a group called what was it? GPS? No.
GPC.
GPC. Yeah. I'm old, okay? It's been a
I'm the oldest.
Oh, okay. Well, then you tell them.
No, you go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
It was GPC, and we had a rehearsal hall down on Commerce Street, which was really an interesting place because it was right next to a hock shop. It was great. Honest Joe's. We would go down there on Sundays. Nobody would be there, so we could play whatever we needed and do our rehearsal. And one day, we had our rehearsal, and in walks three gentlemen. Bud Buschardt, Bob Cardenas, Jim Rowley. And they had a little powwow with our manager, which was Rich Richardson. They stood over there and talked for 5 or 10 minutes. We were rehearsing over here in the other part. They came up and they said, "What's the weirdest song that you know?" And so we got our little powwow going. Here, talk, get together. And the one that we did was called Smell of Incense. And they said, "Can you play it?" We said, "Well, yeah." So we played it. They came back and said, well, after they had another little powwow with Rich, came back and said, "Can you do that in a studio?" We said, "Sure." We did that down at Robin Hood Bryan Studio in Tyler, Texas. He even did our album for us about 8 months later. But
In 3 days.
In 3 days. Whew. To do some.
Robin had helpers.
Yes, he had helpers.
That was in the 60s, y'all.
And it was Jim Rowley, Bob Cardenas, and Bud Buschardt. They had a film crew there. They were going to take pictures and do all this stuff. Okay, fine. We hadn't been involved with that stuff. As these few, we all went to high school together. The other gentlemen were Dan Sauls and John Ford Coley. You know them as England Dan and John Ford Coley. They started in like 74 or 5 out in L.A. But we had so many ideas to do this song, but they all had, keep it simple. Okay, fine. So when it came out, they said, we kept asking them, "When's it going to be released? When's it going to be released?" Well, it would be about July the 28th that it was out. And it started playing. It did real well. We were always impressed with that because that's exactly what we wanted to do. We wanted to be entertainers. Yep. Ovid and I started playing guitar together at 10 years old. That's how long we've known each other. So when they started playing Smell of Incense, my dad had never heard us play. And he heard it on the radio. My mother said, "You know, he's awfully proud of you." I said, "Well, that should help out a little bit with, some stuff. If he likes that, he should like the album." So we started putting together an album. Danny and John started writing songs. Everybody took a little part of it, but it went really well. When they released the Smell of Incense 45 in July, it played 3 times an hour. In 5 states, it hit number 2 in 5 states.
How do you know all that?
That's why I kept telling you to get a better grade of drugs. And so
Bud Buschardt was the cat that did it all. He's the reason
we would
Smell of Incense, and our manager, which was my stepfather at the time. And after that, and that played out, I moved to Los Angeles, again hooked up with England Dan and John Ford Coley, and then toured with Dan and John.
They went all over the world.
And before that, it was Seals and Crofts, and I got blessed. I got lucky. But it was Bud Buschardt
that started everything. Was really proud. The only thing that kept us out of being number 1 was Harper Valley PTA. Y'all know that song? I couldn't have believed it. Even after everything had happened, we did really well. We opened our first big tour. You ever heard of Led Zeppelin? Twice we opened for them. Not too many guys can say that. And it was, I'm talking, man. Did I get a microphone? I'm talking. Bud helped us do that. It was really cool, and we had a good time. And Bud, thank you. It was awesome.
Thank you, Doc. And by the way, from the poster, I loved that Nehru jacket look. I mean, it was, I got a Nehru jacket, I think, when I was a younger man, just off of that poster. So I just want to let you know, love the Nehru jacket. All right, now we'd like to open the floor up for comments, memories from Bud for you. We have a microphone right down there on the second level. Some of my esteemed colleagues will be helping you there to get to that microphone. I will ask your indulgence in keeping your remarks briefer than Jack Shell's. So please keep them, because we still need to get out of here in just a little bit. So there is a spotlight there if you want to make your way to that microphone. My good friend Danny Owen is there to assist you in getting to that mic and everything. If anybody has anything they would like to say, anybody want to jump at it? Okay. Okay.
WFAA after that ever as anything but those golden years, and everybody who works there know what that means. So it's wonderful. I thought maybe I would just share the last year for but a little bit. Bud was playful. We talked on the phone every single week, usually twice a week. And we would go on for hours, and my wife Nancy would just roll her eyes like charts again. When I found out in 1970, and he found out that we were both chart top 40 geeks, no, we were top 40 addicts, the bond started then, and it continued. The last year, during the pandemic, when we could not be together, we were on the phone constantly. And just so you'll know what it was like, because we worried, Bud and I both worried, by the way, Bud has, as you know today now, he has hundreds, if not thousands, of best friends. Because when you were with Bud, that's what you were, his best friend. There was no overlooking the crowd, see if somebody interesting came in, like some of the others referred to. Bud was only there with you. But we were worried about his retirement years, but he retired. And we came up with this game we did that was just fabulous. I just want you to know, one day on the phone, Bud said, what do you think is the best religious song or spiritual song ever to be on the top charts, the Billboard charts? And it's like, oh my gosh, there's so many. Well, we took weeks. We each brought our list, and we finally came up, and it wasn't so much what was the number one the longest or so, it's what had the impact. In that particular case, we came up with Oh Happy Day by the Edwin Hawkins Singers, and Bud and I both loved it. And then we did the best love songs, and then we did the best story songs, and it was weeks and weeks, and I'd be on the phone, and we would laugh as much as anything else, but we had lists and best disco songs. By the way, best story song, Ode to Billy Joe by Bobby Gentry, 1967. Yay. So we shared all that. I do want to just ask special blessings, especially, if I may, for his wonderful brother George and all of Bud's family. I mean, his adored aunt who passed away, but he went to church with her every Sunday here in Dallas. And special for Rob Ray, that last number of years, they went to lunch every single Saturday. Even during the pandemic, they would find a way to do it. And what can you say about Doug and Diane, his next door neighbors? They were his family. They were his family. They sort of like took him on to raise, and it was wonderful. And then Craig, who's Craig Slayton, just a wonderful human being who was there to take him to the hospital, see to his trips, come stay at the house to where he'd be okay after the hospital, and then the wonderful classes, all those people, and the incredible Thursday lunches, the first Thursday of every month, all those folks, so many best friends for Bud. And I will just close by saying it has not been easy to get over first the shock. I had talked to him just before, the shock, and then the sadness and the grief and the intense anger. But in light of the love that is Bud Buschardt, I know I cannot carry that on. I have to release that in memory of Bud. So I release every bit of that, every bit of the shock and the sorrow and the anger. There's no anger here. There's only love and joy for that man, Bud Buschardt, and I thank you all for letting me say this. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Bill. Thank you, sir. Thank you, thank you. Great memories. We all feel the same way you do. Okay, wrapping up. Here is another long time friend from radio with Bud and worked with me at KLIF in Dallas originally. Put the names up in lights. And Bud loved him, and he's also a great music collector, great music person, still doing radio today. Would you please welcome Andy Waldrop?
I'm from the old school, so I'm going to keep it brief. Get in, say what you got to say, and get out.
Thank you.
3 things. First of all, I don't know who's going to end up with the tapes, but whoever that is, 2 names you need to remember. Tom Jones. There's a very popular Tom Jones song from the 60s that Bud did an edit job on. You need to hear that. The other name I want to mention is Ernie Anderson. He was the voiceover man for WFAA. Whoever ends up with the tapes, you will have the Ernie Anderson outtakes. They're very colorful and very fun to listen to. I came back briefly up to North Texas in, I think it was 81. We had just put a new radio station on the air. At that point, it was known as Kix 106. The Hicks brothers had bought 106.1 in Denton from Mel Wheeler Incorporated. And I was doing either a Saturday night show or a Sunday night show. And I don't remember if I had the hotline number to KVIL because I had helped the engineering staff build those studios just up the street here in what was then the Capitol Bank building. But I was on the air, and I called Bud because he was on the air doing his oldies show, and I was up in Denton playing country on this new FM station. And really, I like the oldies much better than I like the country. So I would say what I had to say between the country records, turn the monitor down, turn my radio up, and listen to Bud on KVIL-FM. I think that was one of the best laughs I heard from Bud when I called him up at KVL one of those nights and said, "Hey, Bud, I'm listening to you." He got a kick out of it. Thank you for the time, Chuck.
Thank you, Ange. Thank you for motoring this way from Houston. We appreciate it. Anybody else ready to come speak? Stepping up to the microphone.
Hi, my name's Chelsea Kretz. I'm a public information officer at the Grand Prairie Police Department. I don't want to bury the lead, as Phyllis Slocum would have taught me in college, but the one thing I want to say is that Phyllis and Bud were the 2 most influential people in my life at UNT. I don't remember a lot from college, not because of what y'all might think, I just have the memory of a goldfish. But between Phyllis's classes, my time spent at UNT and NTTV, and Bud's classes, I remember his class the most. It was so much fun. It was so casual. My biggest takeaway, because he knew a lot of us wanted to go into television and to radio, he taught us how to say all the weird Texas towns and all the names, because he knew that that's where we were going to go to get paid pennies at our first job. And sure enough, thanks to Bud and Phyllis, I got paid pennies at my first job, but hey, it was a job right after college. So I want to thank everyone who spoke today. I too learned so much about Bud, more than I ever could have imagined. He was an incredible man, and everyone in this room is so lucky to know him. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Coming to the microphone, please.
Hi, my name is Jody Deane, and there's still some people who will applaud. That's good. I was actually asked to tell this story because I know we've gone long, and there is another show coming up, but it's a quick story. For those of you who had the privilege of visiting Bud Buschardt while he did his show at the old Capitol Bank building, what is now Mockingbird Station, KVIL's offices were on the 5th floor. And in those days, Bud would do his show and leave the door to the radio control room open. And so you could hear the sound of his monitors wafting down the hall. And any Sunday, there would be a gathering of people up there because nobody worked 5 or 6 days a week at KVIL. You worked 7 days a week. That was the job. You never took a day off. Even when you were home, you were doing show prep. So there were people up there that day. There was Frank Mediachi, who was the music director at the time. Jay Currington, who was our officer of morale. He was really our butler, but we loved him so much, he changed the coffee. He kept the place clean. I can't remember. There were 2 or 3. Bill Ryan, the engineer, was up there. Several people were up there that day. And there was another employee who worked there at the time that, to put it charitably, was somewhat unpopular. And she'd come up that day to work on a Saturday to earn some extra money and maybe to earn a little extra favor with her boss, who was Ann Bradley, our treasurer. And so she'd gone to work on the 5th floor, and nobody noticed her slipping into the building. Frank was in his office. Jay was in the break room. Bud was on the air. And after a while, Bud began to hear a noise through his headphones whenever he would key the mic. And it sounded, for all the world, like someone screaming. And eventually, he and Frank and everybody else who was up the building that day decided to follow the sound to its source. And they were all drawn to the lobby. Do you remember this story, Chuck? And they realized that this employee that most people really didn't like that very much had obviously forgotten something and gone to her car to get it, gotten on the elevator, and found herself trapped on the elevator. And the Doppler effect was amazing, because as she would go all the way down to the 1st floor, you'd hear her go, "Ah!" Then all the way up to 10. "Ah!" Over and over again. "Ah! Ah!" All of these guys are standing in the lobby looking at each other, and they realize who's on the elevator. And Bud Buschardt, the nicest person you will ever meet in your life, along with the other people standing there, all turned around and went back to doing what they were doing. According to Bud, that employee marched into Jerry Bobo's office on Monday morning demanding that we sue the Otis Elevator Company. The nicest man I ever met. KVIL was Camelot. And I don't remember the mythology, but I'm quite sure that in our version, Bud Buschardt was the noblest knight of them all.
Amen. Thank you, Jody. I knew we were in trouble. I couldn't see Jody, but I knew we were in trouble when he took the microphone off the stand.
I'm not
God
quite
bless
sure
you,
how
son.
you follow that.
Go ahead.
My name's Martin Zaranko. I had the honor of being Bud's engineer at UNT his last few years there, and I'm just so happy to see all of you. God, I was hoping to hold it together. I'm just so happy to see Bud's family and all the people he's influenced. Like, There's people here that are over 80. There's people here that just graduated. Deane up there doing the live stream graduates in like 2 weeks. Bud's influence and help to everyone is just humbling. And I just wanted to thank Aaron and Joe for Joe, he went through hell to get here to Dallas, and he pushed on through and made sure all of this stuff happened. So I just wanted to thank all you guys for putting this on.
Amen. Thank you, Martin. And thanks for your contribution again to the video and everything, the videos, everything you've done here. Anybody else coming to the microphone? Going, gone. All right. We got one more.
Hi, my name is Christy Byerly, and my entire life I've known Bud. My dad was best friends with Bud starting when they were in the 6th grade. Yeah, I'm a school teacher. So, yeah, I taught speech. So my dad sat behind Bud in 6th grade. And so we've known Bud all of our lives, and so Bud became our godfather, and he was very protective of me, because I was the girl, because there were boys, and I was the girl, and there was an off-color rated R movie that he had a script for, and I was like, Bud, can I see it? No, Christy, you're not old enough yet. But one day, I was 42 years old, and I asked him, Bud, can I see that script? No, Christy, you're just not old enough yet. He's up in heaven with my daddy, and they were 2 peas in a pod. They were called Mutt and Jeff. I love you, Bud.
Thank you, Christy. Thank you so much. Okay, last call for alcohol. Anybody else? All right, we've managed to spend 2 hours, which I think is amazing. We probably could have stayed here 8 hours telling stories about Bud, but I want to take a moment and thank each and every one of you for attending this celebration of our friend Bud Buschardt's life. I want to thank the Buschardt family for putting this together, making their time available for us to share these memories. I know Bud is watching over us the proceedings today. Probably has a good crowd around him. Elvis, Big Bopper, Bill Haley, George Harrison, and of course, Buddy Holly. May God richly bless you as you leave today. God bless you all. Thank you.
This heart of mine.